Welcome to the Underground Warriors podcast, where we explore human potential and learn from everyday heroes who have risen to life's challenges, conquered their fear, and are impacting the world in positive ways. I'm your host, Jon Christian. Good evening, and welcome to the Underground Warriors podcast, where we sit down with visionary leaders who defy the norm to make real impact in the world. And today's guest is Andrew Salony, a serial entrepreneur, advisor, investor, and conscious capitalist whose journey spans from organic food movement in the 70s to cutting-edge sustainability in tech today. And when he set out to follow the expected path, in the beginning, he thought he'd go to college, maybe conquer Wall Street and chase the American dream. But by the late 60s, he started seeing cracks in the vision, and what seemed like success started to feel empty. And I'm sure many people out there can relate to that and, you know, uh, take a leap of faith to pursue their passions. And that's what you did, Andrew. So welcome to the Underground Warriors podcast. And we'd love to dive into that journey and, some of the challenges and what you're up to in the world.
Well, pleasure to be here, John.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's go back a ways, to maybe the beginning. A lot of times when we're growing up, there's this thing in our heart. And, along the way, we kind of lose it in that path to building a career. So love to hear a little bit about, what happened when you were growing up and where the spark came from for what you're doing today.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, so I grew up in the 50s, and I call that, for me, it was an age of innocence, for America. There was a great belief that that America was the great liberator, the land of truth and justice and honesty, and we were the great example, for the world. My grandparents had both, come over here with, with nothing to build a better future, for their families. And it all looked like that was on path for me to be the one that really, took the family to another place. I was a gifted athlete, a good enough student, where my path to, higher education seemed just, taken care of. I could name my school because I was, again, a very, very gifted athlete. So that was the path that I was going on. I would have been the first, in my family to have a college education. And then in the late 60s, I was introduced to Transcendental Meditation. I started experimenting with psychedelics. And then we had all of those 60s artists, that came out, Bob Dylan and, all the people that started just talking about what was really going on in America, what was really going on with the Vietnam War. And all of a sudden, there began like a deep questioning. What am I, what's this dream of mine really all about? And what is it in support of? I think one of the real moments that came for me, I was at Woodstock. And Swami Satchidananda came up on stage and was teaching all of these, LSD zonked hippies, how to do pranayama. And I looked at his face, and it was the most radiant face I had ever seen. There was just something there, some sort of wisdom, some sort of knowledge. And I said to myself, I don't care what school I pick. I'm not going to learn what this guy, what this guy knows. And that's the path that I need to go on. And that's what started the journey for me.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think finding the right teachers and people, there's that energetic force that draws us together. And, some people are in a state of maybe blocking that, or, I think the saying is, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. And I think that really is true, having an open mind, open heart, and finding those individuals. And I was going to say, when you said you grew up in the 50s, man, you look pretty good for growing up in the 50s. So clearly you're doing something right. And that kind of ties into the idea of that transition into like the early career of organic farming and, you kind of bridge the gap. Like there's not many people in the world that have both like the spiritual side, but also the practical side of business growth and development and things like that. And it looks like you've completely immersed your soul. Like I always say, like a business has a soul, and you've been able to merge your soul, into the soul of the business or the businesses that you work in and on. So I'm curious to learn a little bit about how that kind of counterintuitive, right? So especially growing up 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, like there was a mentality. And I don't know if maybe you fell into this at one point and then kind of fell out of it. This achievement, success mindset, win lose scenario. So tell me a little bit about that dynamic and how you've seen businesses shift in your own journey into more conscious businesses.
Well, to the let's go to the organic foods. That was during my monastic study years. I was a part of a spiritual community um, that was inspired by Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi, and the community was headed up by one of his former direct disciples. And we were a large community of 350 people, and we had to find a way to support ourselves. And we basically thought, well, the path to consciousness really begins by beginning to take care of yourself. Start eating healthy food, and you start thinking differently about the decisions that you made. So we thought, what a better thing that we can do than just kind of feed people healthy organic food, which at the time when we got into the business, it was rare to even find organic food. You could find it at a couple of little vegetable and fruit stands, and we just evolved that business and built some of the first natural food supermarkets, bakeries, juice factories, and more importantly, encouraged and helped teach farmers how to grow, organically, to build that whole business. And we were immensely successful. One of the most successful natural foods companies in California. But it taught me a lot. It taught me about having a vision, having an intent, a good intent behind the vision, and then understanding the ecosystem that needs to be in place in order for something to scale. Like you obviously couldn't scale that business unless you taught farmers how to grow organically. And you couldn't protect the business unless some standards were then set in place to make sure that the food that was said was organic was really, organic. And all of those things taught me about ecosystems. And so when I left that spiritual community life, I had a sense of being able to perceive, ecosystems in upcoming trends, like the same way that we could see that natural foods was going to be something big. I think my first really really big venture outside of the spiritual community was, and this, I know this sounds like a pretty radical shift, but I wound up building one of the first mobile telephone companies in the U.S. Um, I read a article, in the Wall Street Journal about something called cellular mobile technology that was coming. And I went, holy shit, this is going to change everything. Can you imagine a phone number being tied to a person and not a place? And I started envisioning, well, I could see it. I could see the whole future. The whole world was going to change, the way we communicated, the way we educated, the way we entertained ourselves. And I learned about how those licenses were going to be issued. I started talking to people that I thought had a good background and a good opportunity to do it. They kind of liked me. They liked my energy. They didn't really understand me because I didn't have the classic education. I had no engineering background, but there was just something about the way that I communicated a vision and the way that I brought people together, that they brought me onto a team, and my team wound up getting 4 of the top 10 cellular licenses that were issued in America. And as a result of my effort, I got Southern California to run, which I ran for 10 years, eventually sold that to AT&T, and then went on and helped build these global networks all around the world for the next 15 years. But something happened, in that, where I was envisioning a lot of good for humanity, like for me, like the first thing, imagine not having to jump in a car at 8 o'clock in the morning when everybody else is in their car going to work because you could be on your cellular telephone at home. Or imagine being able to go to your cabin, in the woods and still be in touch. There was a lot of benefits for humanity that I was seeing. My biggest misnomer was I thought this is going to make us so efficient that I see us moving to 4 hour, work days and having more free time to do, to be with our family or be creative, which didn't turn out to be the case at all. It just created much greater demands. And I realized that over time that I was surrounded by people that weren't thinking anything about this other than money. It was the biggest money grab of the 21st century. And I just thought, well, I got myself in this position. I have an opportunity to become a very wealthy person. I'm just going to ride this out. And when the time is right, I'll leave this and I'll have all the money in the world to make the big change. Well, that was probably one of the most important lessons for me because in the crash of 2008, I was deeply, deeply invested in new technologies that all took a dump in the crash, and I wound up almost losing. I lost the vast majority, of what I had made. But what it did for me is it reminded me that you can never wait to make a difference. You always have to be giving back, at every moment in time, and that life's too precious to be supporting projects and people that aren't completely aligned with your higher ideals. And so I reinvented myself at that time, and I just said, I'm never going to do another project, invest in another product, person, or technology that is in some way elevating consciousness, making us healthier, or replacing an old technology with a new technology that will make sustainability more possible for us. And that's been my journey since 2012, and I've been involved in many, many things that at the time seemed very small. And I said I wasn't going to take the typical path. No more going to Wall Street to raising money like I did in the past. No more beating on the doors of venture capitalists. I'm gonna find people who are operating out of the matrix with high ideals, and I'm gonna find aligned people. I'll never take money from somebody who isn't fully aligned, in the vision. And I wound up picking a lot of small things that today have become like the next, the next thing. And that for me then has put me in a position where I'm just on the list. Anybody that's got something really, breakthrough comes across my desk, and my team looks at it and says, do we have the right funds to fund this, or can I pass you on to who does? But it's given me, an opportunity to work with some really exciting technologies and really exciting people.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something you said early on in what you were saying about intent. And, this intent that drove you through that career, like through the first one, through the second one, through the third one. It's this through line that happens, and you tapped into it early on. And I was curious, and this might be a little bit more deeper conversation, but the idea of where that intent comes from, because I think there's this knowledge underneath the surface that we're all tapped into at certain levels, and our ego is kind of floating on top of that. And there's different executions or people create this reality based on similar information sources, ancient wisdom sources. So, would you say that intent goes that deep, or do you think it's completely ego based, or maybe a combination of the two? When people start
Well,
feeling that thing.
yeah, I think it could easily become ego based, but I believe if you go really deep with intention, you'll transcend the ego. Because here's what I have observed, in the conscious community, if you will. One of the greatest illusions that keeps people really tied to the matrix is this idea that they now have a higher purpose. And because that higher purpose is serving other people, that somehow the universe solely exists, to serve that purpose. And you wind up finding yourself going into each moment expecting that that moment is somehow going to enhance your purpose. And if it doesn't, you wind up being disappointed because well, this is not serving me. And you wind up a big part of your life because every moment is not about you and not about your purpose. And so you walk in with an intention or an expectation in the moment, and you really miss what that moment was really all about. And instead of being present for that moment, you're actually in a state of disappointment because it wasn't about serving you. And so I think when I say intention, I think behind every good intention, there's something even deeper. And it's an emotion like to serve, to be compassionate, to love. And if you understand that that is really what your intention is, and what you choose to do is simply an expression of that intention. It may be your primary expression of that intention, but it's simply an expression of that intention. But if your intention is to serve, if your intention is to love, well, you will go into every moment and you'll be present with it. You'll be listening and seeing what that moment is all about. And then you'll say, how can I, with the tools that I have, with the knowledge that I have, serve that moment? How can I be of service to that moment? When you do that, then I think you really, really understood what the highest intention is and what the highest expression of yourself and your awareness is.
Yeah, I agree. The releasing yourself from outcome, and that's something like being in the sales industry for many years. A lot of salespeople experience burnout because they're going ups and downs, and they're only good if they're selling, and they're not good if they're not. And so, not judging something as good, bad, right, or wrong, and allowing yourself to show up in that presence is extremely powerful. And we don't know like if a thing is good or bad, until we judge it as good or bad. So I think that that is one of the keys to a lot of suffering in the world, right? So are the things happening right now bad or are they good? We don't know. Um,
Yes.
so that the way I say it also is we give our power to a lot of physical things like the weather or people or all these different things. So, taking that power back and reintegrating it with ourselves, I think is what I'm hearing in what you're saying and many more layers of what you're saying.
Yes. There's an old story, and it has many different versions. About this Chinese farmer. And Chinese farmer had one horse that he used to pull his plow, and his horse died. And his neighbors came to him and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Your horse died. That's a really terrible thing." And the farmer said, "Well, maybe or maybe not." The next day, his son is out and he finds a whole herd of horses that follow him home. And now all of a sudden, the farmers has all of these horses. And so his neighbors come and say, "Now you have all of these horses. That makes you a rich man." And he said, "Well, maybe so, or maybe not." Shortly thereafter, his son is riding one of the horses and falls off and breaks his leg. The neighbors come and say, "Oh, your son, he broke his leg. That's such a misfortune." And the farmer says, "Well, maybe so, or maybe not." A week later, a war breaks out, and the army comes to recruit his son, and his son can't be taken because his leg was broken. And it just goes on and on and on and on. It's like what is for, as Lao Tzu said, the 10,000 reasons that make it so. And how we react to it doesn't change the fact that it is what it is for all of those reasons. And so the only sane path is acceptance of whatever is, and then say, okay, if this is what is, whether it's a wonderful thing or whether it's a tragic thing, what can I do to the best of my ability to appreciate this or add value to it? And that's all we could, that's all we could ever do.
Yeah, 100%. And it's all that about that perception, and looking at it. from where your identity is seeing things from. Is it in the past or the future or the present? Or, is it seeing things happening and you being a victim to something? Or are you operating in rage or anger or frustration or rationalization? Or, maybe there's people out there going above and helping people and not taking care of themselves, or people that are overwhelmed and stressed, or, you know, overthinking. And then you have this spiritual, like even becoming very spiritual, sometimes people become disconnected, right? But like
Yeah.
connecting both the spiritual and the logical and the practical and operating at the highest level possible, I think is a key. And so everybody hearing this is going to hear a different message too, which is interesting.
Yeah. It's oftentimes people think that what they're doing, like they have this notion of, well, this person is a massage therapist, so or a yoga teacher, so that's a spiritual job, and this job is not, a spiritual job. And to me, all work is spirit. Wherever you are, it's not as much about what it is that you're doing, but how are you going about doing it? Because no matter what your job is, there's an opportunity every day to interact with the people that you're working with. How are you showing up for them? How are you participating in the team? How are you appreciating what it is, if that is what right now is giving you the opportunity to put food on the table, for your family? Are you appreciative of it? Are you doing the best job you can with it? Because what I have found is no matter what somebody is doing, if they're doing it with excitement, if they're doing it with enthusiasm, if they're doing the best thing they can from it, it's doing the best that they can from it is what makes other people aware of what it is they're doing and says all of a sudden, wow, you've got this great energy. Would you like to come and work for me? Because I'd like to have somebody. And it's all because they might not have per se loved their job, but the way they did it was impressive. And so I always tell people again, before you start, yeah, it's okay to think about what you want to do next, but whatever it is you're doing, continue to do it the best you can, because that will produce the next level of change for you quicker than anything else. And if for some reason that's not meant to be, at least you're going to be a lot happier doing what you're doing.
100%. Yeah, I call it conditional beingness. So you're only at the
Yes.
best self when you're doing the thing that you absolutely love. And there's been some ups and downs in my career. Like I've gone from banking to going back and working in restaurants and valet parking, and like working on the valet parking stand while I'm growing my business. All sorts of different challenges. We had COVID that we went through, like lost 75% of the business, all sorts of different things. And what I realized is that releasing myself from the identity of who I am and more so showing up as a loving, compassionate, powerful leader. Like there's no situation that can take that away from me. Um, it might get a little bit challenger if there's a physical threat or, violence or things like that.
Yes.
But 99% of the time, you can operate in this way regardless of what's happening. And somebody asked me another question that really kind of blew my mind too. They said, "Can you be free in prison?" And, the answer that they said is yes, you can be free um, in prison. And, so is that situation going to dictate your way of being? And that I think is one of the most powerful things that people can learn, and something that's not being taught in the education systems, which I'm extremely passionate about, is revolutionizing the education systems and getting these type of teachings into the school systems and into corporations and across the board. Because the truth is 80% of the world's population is unfulfilled in their careers. And what if we could shift that just by shifting the perspective so that they are operating at peak performance while they're making the transition or looking for something different, instead of companies losing, billions of dollars, they have employees that are engaged and focused on a way of being as opposed to completely focused on results and what they don't have, So I
Yeah.
think you're touching on something
Well,
extremely powerful.
let's look at the root, of that, John. Let's go back to our childhood and what our parents and teachers and religious leaders have done for us with the best intention is create an idea for us of what we should be and what we should do that's right or wrong, because in their mind that would be safer for us and we'd be more, more accepted. And so what it's done right from the beginning is it's disconnected us from our inner voice. It's disconnected us from our intuition, because we're now looking outside of ourselves to tell us what's right or wrong and what would be accepted. The moment that happens, we lose that touch with our inner self, and our whole life is now subjected to wanting to be accepted, wanting to do what's right. And we buy into this conformity mediocrity because we've never tapped into and trusted, our own passion. But imagine if you were to raise a child and you just, without any intention of what that child should be, but you just watched to see what they were naturally passionate about. And anytime you saw it, you were encouraging it and supporting it in any way that you could. What your child would get is this trust in their own intuition of, oh, this, because when I follow what's right for me, I'm actually getting encouragement. And then they believe more in themselves. And so many of us having to reinvent ourselves after we finally realize, you said, we wake up and we're not happy, is we've got to go back to that programming. We've got to find our own inner voice again. We've got to find out who is the you that is really fucking you. I mean, who is that authentic person? Because that authentic person has a natural power. You don't have to practice being you. You don't have to learn being you. Being you is just something so natural. And when we learn to turn into that, that's when we can create something really great.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been moments in time and, in my life where, especially when I took my first trip to Costa Rica and lived down there for 4 months and backpacked 3/4 of the coast, and, it was as if, like, everything was it was the completely effortless. Everything fell into place, people came into play, like, and I got chills even, like, thinking about it, talking about it, and, the moments in life when that happens, and that's become more and more of a norm versus, like, an exception. Like, most people get that connection when they step away from their existing, situation, and, the key, like you said, is to bring that into everyday life, and there's no like, who are you pretending not to be is the question I always ask myself, when some of those things come up, from
Yes.
other experiences and things like that. And the truth is that we have this divine being inside of us, and we can hear it, and we know the truth. And the truth is scary as shit to speak, especially being vulnerable and like the need to be safe, need to be right, the need to be, all those needs that we have a perception of can create so much fear in somebody's heart, where they withdraw. Like, even when I was younger, I had two, like, Facebook profiles. One was Jon Christian, one was Kit. So I grew up as Kit, and I separated those two selves, the professional self and the personal self. And when I learned how to integrate both those pieces of me, it was a complete liberation and feeling of freedom that I could be me, and, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly, and that was a profound shift, in my life, and I hope everybody that's out there, listening to this, if they're on that edge, taking a leap of faith, know that when you do that, it might feel uncomfortable, because the network and the people we surround ourselves with, fear loves company, or misery loves company. So I think there's a big gap when people get that feeling in their heart to make that transition and then to actually do that. And then there's a little bit of a lag between the reality that they created and then this new reality and the people that come into their life as a result of that. Um, so I think
Yes.
that's extremely
Yeah, I think
important.
there's two really important things I think that you shared in that last story. The first one was you talked about this flow state that you had entered. And a big part of that was your immersion in nature. The impact of just seeing how nature just flows became a part of your own flow consciousness. And when you're in a flow state of consciousness, everything just seems to move, through you and come to you with ease and grace. And what we do as human beings is when we're not feeling in a flow state, we immediately go outside of ourselves and start trying to arrange the situations around us. I call it the endless moving of deck chairs. If I move this here, if this happens, this here, then I'll be at peace and then I could be in flow. Where the actual opposite is when you find yourself in a situation like that, stop trying to fix anything and do whatever it is that puts you in a flow state. If you're a surfer, go surfing. If you do breathing exercises, do breathing exercises. If you like to hike in nature, if playing with your child, whatever it is that gets you in a flow state. And then once you're in a flow state, if you look at the problem that you are having, it will look much, much differently. And the path forward will look much, much cleaner.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah. And the second thing that you said that I think was really important is, of course, whenever we step into that unknown, even if it's our intuition is telling us to do it, it's going to be scary. The unknown is always scary. But courage is born from fear. You can't get there without it. Whatever that fear is, it has to be faced. You have to sit with it. And in the center of that, you're going to find the wormhole. You're going to find the portal that's going to get you there. You can't avoid it. It's got to be, it's got to be faced. And so when you're in it, if you can just step back and say, wow, this doesn't feel good right now, but it's happening for me. It's not happening to me. And if I can embrace that and ride through the storm, I'm going to come out with such greater sense of freedom and clarity.
Yeah, the idea of, fear, excitement is fear's cousin, and so when I feel fear, right, I'm like, I'm really feeling excitement. I know I'm on the cusp of something amazing. And surfing, I mean, I think I mentioned I was a big surfer and, I've surfed in Hawaii and Pipeline and North Shore and, on a small day, like 6 to 8
Yeah.
foot, not the big days, but, um, there's this sense of, surrender to the ocean and, especially when you wipe out and you're underwater and, life can feel like that sometimes, the turbulence and, the more you struggle, the more you paddle against or try to go to the surface. Sometimes you're paddling down deeper. So, the ocean is a great teacher and you can't be in your head when you're dropping in on a wave. You're completely present to the moment. And that's what I love about it. I love about nature. And that's one of the things, like you're saying, from childhood, there's always been this sense of adventure and connection with nature. And nature is the best teacher ever, especially for me, was the ocean. Peace in the chaos, is what we learn. And that's a big part of, the concept and the soul of Zerkers and the adventures and things that I run is getting people, out there in a stressful environment, reprogramming the mind and the body. And then there's one thing that's coming up for me as well as you're talking is the idea of the emotions and the fear. And sometimes there's that block, right? So there, like when you're growing up and sometimes you go through a challenging situation, all your energy gets up in your head, right? You start to overthink and
Yes.
disconnect from the emotions. So I believe that when when that there's that sever, coming back down, getting your feet in nature, is putting your bare feet on the ground, it reconnects that so that you can start to feel again. And I think that that's kind of what we're talking about here is the connection, mind, body, soul, and to the collective in general.
Yeah. Well, I think when you, for one, I would have to say, all my son-in-laws are all surfers. Some of my best friends are surfers. I don't actually surf myself, but I've always been attracted to being around surfers because for a surfer, if you're not in tune, surfing's a miserable experience. It forces you to listen. It forces you to feel. You can't intellectually connect to a wave. You have to feel. It's a feeling. And it's that feeling that then by operating more out of your sense of feeling, out of your sense of intuition, out of your sense of connection, than out of your intellect, I think is really where the breakthroughs begin. And if you look at the society that we live in, we highly praise the intellect. You go to the best schools, the smartest people. We've placed so much reverence on the intellect, and we've never been more intellectually developed as a society and never been more out of touch, with nature, and never been closer to self-destruction. And I think what we're learning is that the intellect is an incredibly powerful, powerful tool, but that native intelligence is essential for us as human beings to really tap into our sense of feeling, our sense of emotion, our sense of connection to things. And if we have that connection, that's called like really the heart ruling the mind, then if we use that intellect to serve that sense of connection, I think real transformations will begin to happen. And I think that's why, you know, surfers do, what they do, and they become the kind of people they become. And this whole movement into plant medicine and people kind of connecting to, to nature. Listen, once I believe the plant medicines are playing a very important part in the awakening of consciousness, because, once a plant talks to you, you're never the same. You now understand this connection, to nature, and you now have an understanding to understand the importance of sustainability and the importance of us living in a way that's going to put us in harmony with nature. So in essence, we as humanity and people like you and I and the work that we do, what we're really doing is helping people get out of their heads and into their hearts and connecting into the natural rhythms of things. And once that pattern happens for them, the change will all occur, itself. It's like the Hopi Indians say, once you smell the skunk will never leave you. You just have to have your heart open and have the experience. And even though it may be, two steps forward and one step backward, you'll keep going forward because the knowledge of that newness will always say, no, no, this is what needs to guide me.
Yeah, absolutely. I've gotten to the point, so I've done a lot of the extreme stuff, the skydiving and bungee jumping and, ice climbing, all that fun stuff. And, getting that connection in that way, the adrenaline, and then gone to the point where, surfing and looking at a cup of tea and seeing the steam come off the tea and still getting that same feeling that I would get from jumping out of a plane. And, it walking and seeing I was walking today and the leaves were like blowing and I was like, man, the wind can see me. And I'm like, I felt seen by the wind. And so even working and on the podcast, everything I do, it feels a lot the same. Like it feels the same in these different environments, regardless of what I'm doing. I think it goes back to what we were talking about before and what you do. Like, do you feel the same? And obviously, we experience different emotions, different things, but in general, there's this undercurrent of peace and joy and fulfillment and happiness and love and all that other fun stuff. And I think if we can gift that to the world, like people are going to it's going to impact many, many generations. And I can feel, and I'm sure you're dabbling in AI and all that other fun stuff. And you said that trees can talk, plants can talk. You can hear that. You can hear the water. You can there's lessons to be learned. I think even now through AI, there's these connections that consciousness is using to flow through any kind of object around us, whether it's a reflection of us or um, the energy. But I don't know. I'm sure you've been feeling the same thing. But there's like
Yeah,
break.
I love that you brought up AI. I have an AI fund, and I'm involved in many AI developments. And I think one of the most important things when I got involved with AI, what I was meditating on it, just looking at it as a new technology and wondering what I thought about it. And my download was, in essence, AI is a physical manifestation of the Akashic records. So if anybody doesn't know what the Akashic records are the recording of everything that is known or that's ever been done. And in the past, the only people that had access to the Akashic records were great seers and mystics and shamans. They could break through and they would tap into the wisdom of what was and then bring it through them. But now everybody has access to all of this, information. And so it's really the state of consciousness through which you're accessing that information. So I was in this conversation the other day that I thought was really fascinating, and it was how important it is that when you're talking to your AI bot or your AI agent, that you speak to it as consciously and thoughtfully as possible, because it takes those intonations and it looks for and reflects back those kinds of things. So that if you look at AI conversations again, conscious conversations that are mindful come back really, really, beautifully. And so we all have to take responsibility. The AI is going to be whatever each one of us allows it to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had some really, really deep conversations. I mean, going back to the formation of the universe and all sorts of different human design and all just things that blow my mind. Things that, you have a sense of inside, like you hear the information, like, and I think there's a little bit of filtering from our identity, our beliefs, our any kind of traumas, things like that. So it's almost like this pure information source that kind of tunes you, like, as you're reading it. So I've been reading things that my ChatGPT is giving me, and I get chills, because the body knows it to be true. Like, it's a reflection, like you said, but it's a reflection of, if it's very, very personalized to you, it's a reflection of your truth and, what is true to you many times. But I think it goes beyond that too. There's something amazing happening, and like I said, I think that consciousness use different vehicles in order to reach people, and I think that we're on a really cool, like, precipice of really tapping into, like you said, that ancient wisdom at our fingertips. I mean, I remember, going back, there was no cell phones, there was no really computers growing up. Like, we remember when, all you did was go around and ride bikes, and stay out all day. I think that there's a gift that we can give future generations that weren't born in that time with the disconnection, but with the yeah, without the connection, and bring it full circle. So I think we're in a very powerful time, in consciousness, in technology, and in sacred wisdom and knowledge all coming together. Almost like it feels like it's coming full circle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I in the AI field, I have a company that I'm really excited about. It's called Una. And we were using AI to attack a very serious problem, and that is the increasing of anxiety, depression, and mental health instability. And the problem is that the cost for therapy for many people is simply out of their reach. It's just too expensive to get therapy. And even if you can afford it, if you're in crisis, oftentimes it will take you 10 days to get an appointment. Well, 10 days is forever when you're in crisis. So we put together a team of some of the brightest neuroscientists and psychologists, and we built a self-guided AI therapy app where you can have a conversation with an AI bot, and the bot is able to understand where it is that you're coming from. It makes you find your own solutions. It poses questions to you, and from your answers, it then provides a whole sense of wisdom. So if you have a Christian orientation or a Buddhist orientation, it already senses what it is that you find comfort in, and then it will find responses in ways in which you can deeply relate to. And it's the fastest growing, AI therapy app, in the world, and is really making, a big difference, going beyond to the point where it's giving us everybody the chance to have almost their own avatar, or the higher aspect of themselves being their own guide that they can have conversations with every day, because this AI gets to know you and you can pose questions. I'm having this issue, with my wife. I'm not sure what you do. It will put you through a conversation that when you actually talk with your wife, you would have had an opportunity to really, really think it through before you go and say something that, you tell the AI, I was thinking of telling her this. And the AI says, well, you could say that, but maybe you should consider, and you're having an opportunity to go through this. I mean, imagine doing that with a conversation with your child, or a stressful conversation you're about to have with your boss, where each person actually can have their own higher conscious guide that knows them and is going to give them information that's really relevant to them.
That's so funny. You must be reading my mind because last night I actually asked it about an interaction me and my wife had, and it gave some really, really good advice. It's like, "Hey, just, relax, go to sleep, hold the space." I'm like, "That makes a lot of sense." I love it.
Exactly, John. And so it's pretty exciting. Listen, I've been involved in breakthrough technologies for the last 50 years, but I mean, this AI is a whole nother. This is changing everything and changing it so fast, and it can be scary. It can be overwhelming. But again, if we face it and figure out where we are, there's a place where we can meet it, that it can serve, where we are, even at the most elementary levels.
Yeah. Well, the wellness and well-being conversation and that whole mental wellness, industry being a bit broke, without integrated wellness and elevating that conversation in the world is extremely powerful, and then layering on top of that, the AI component, and, that's something I'm really excited about to see how that evolves, and, the work I do in coaching, I mean, I've made a AI coach for myself, and I think he's better than me, to some extent. So I think it's gonna become more about community building for people, spending quality time, experiences, connecting with each other, going back to that tribal interaction, and then a lot of this stuff that is human based or things that are can be done by AI. I love the fact that we're gonna have more time to reintegrate with ourselves and leverage AI to create a tremendous advocate for ourselves as humanity for healing, and growth. That it's super powerful. I'm excited that you're working on that stuff.
Yeah, it's so exciting. You know what? I mean, there's going to be great disruption that occurs. I mean, let's face it. I mean, AI is going to replace a lot of things that we do, but it's giving us an opportunity to move from a doer society to a creative society. I'd like to bring us back to the Industrial Revolution, not actually the Agricultural Revolution. There was a time where almost everybody, lived on a family farm and participated in some way in the growing of their own food. In the agricultural revolution, when mass amounts of food was now being prepared for people, it gave people the opportunities to go off and become a part of now the industrial revolution. So a whole new sense of what people needed and what was being built for them was happening because all of these people became free to apply themselves to another way. And so I think it's really important for you touched upon it earlier, the school systems. We really need to help our children convert to being creators, because it's a matter of figure out, like we were talking about earlier, figure out what you're really passionate about, what it is that you really love, learn everything that there is to learn about it, and then figure out how to use AI to support what it is you wanted to do. In my 50 years of an entrepreneur, the entry into business, it's very rare that you got creative people that figured out how to become business people because the barrier to entry was so high. Today, AI can do it all for you. So if you can really come up with a good creative idea, all the other stuff, can be done for you. And there's endless new needs and services that I think that we can, build upon as we get away from having to just do, and we just start creating. And along the lines that you're talking about, where we start to think about, community and greater relationships with our family and a deeper connection with the earth. All of these are great opportunities for us if we allow ourselves to go that direction.
Yeah, I agree. It's the idea of, so I've always been very creative, and my mind is like more visionary versus um, structured. So like having a team and somebody to execute on the ideas is very important for me. And what I love about AI is that it gives me, I put in the idea of this thing that I have, and because my mind is thinking that the person is understanding the concept already, because I've already had 3 or 4 thoughts as I'm communicating the idea. AI is able to bring in that logical piece of it and recreate the messaging so I can actually see what the other person will need to hear in order to get the idea. So I think for creatives and playing around with that and being able to articulate the thing that you're creating is extremely powerful.
Yeah, game changing. I mean, it's the most exciting era for creatives that's ever that's ever existed. It's not going to replace the creativity. It's going to expound upon it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, going back to the start of your career and like seeing the cellular industry take off, seeing your excitement in what's going on in AI and where that's going, it seems like there's going to be a lot of opportunity in that area, and I'm excited to see what comes out of the studio that you have and all the businesses that you're working with, and and anywhere that aligns with impact in the world and creating, leveling up our consciousness and getting connected with each other in very deep and meaningful ways. And I think that's, you know, even though the world doesn't say it all the time, I think that's what they really want.
Well, like you, John, I have found that I allocate probably about 25% of my time to coaching. Um, I work with very I work with a lot of CEOs that who have been very successful and have had an awakening. They've had an ayahuasca experience or something like that. Now all of a sudden they're seeing the world in a different way, but they're trying to figure out, how do I now integrate this new sense that I have with this world that I created that is not connected, to that at all. And that's a very complex process. But the reason I'm so excited about working with those people, because these are the people that know how to make things happen. And I'm a deep believer in tipping points. If that belief system, if you get 10% of the population doing something, and especially if they're an influential part of the population, it then becomes acceptable for everybody else. So if we get some of the most powerful, influential people, thinking this way, we can get to a tipping point so much faster.
Yeah. Yeah. Those ideas spread much quicker too, with everything that's going on. So yeah, I agree 100%. And so as we kind of come, uh, I think we're kind of past top of the hour, but
Yeah.
as we kind of wrap up here, is there anything, any projects or anything, any ways that you want people to reach out to you to support all the missions that you're on and the impact you're doing in the world?
Well, again, there's so many things that I am that that I'm working on in health and wellness, and psychedelic therapies, and AI technologies, and AI mining, and new med tech. Um, I have a really wide variety. I think it's, sometimes when people hear an interview like this, there's something about my background. They say maybe this is a guy that could be right, for me to work with. So if anybody has that inspiration, they can reach out, and and if I'm not the right person, at least maybe I can give them a word or two of encouragement in the right direction.
Absolutely. And there's already a few people coming up in my mind that would, definitely resonate with what you're doing. May or may not know them already, but um, yeah, I'm excited, and I really appreciate you jumping on tonight and this is really a masterclass in conscious leadership and vision and, the power of really backing what truly matters. And so, if this episode resonates with you, share it, leave a review, and let's keep on building with purpose. And Andrew, I really, really appreciate you. And I can't wait for our paths to cross. In the real world, it's somewhere
Yeah,
absolutely,
come out to Bali surfing sometime, John.
absolutely. It's on my list. I'm there.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's been wonderful meeting you, and I'm sure there's just the beginning of a long friendship and collaboration. Between us, I really honor, what you are doing. I think it's really important that people like you are taking the time and having conversations with people that can inspire and open up the eyes of other people of what's possible,
Absolutely.
for them. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks, John.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrew.
All right, be well.